Right, good afternoon, everybody. Evening, depending on your view of the time of day. My name's Robin Morris. I'm convener of the Oxford Energy Network, and this week we have Helene Gosden from Arup speaking about retrofit at scale. So hopefully you're all in the right room or on the right webinar. Just to have a quick introduction, Helena recently contributed to the development of an independent report, Cheaper Bills, Warmer Homes, together with a group of cross-sector UK industry experts, including people from this university, outlining proposals for 10-year investment plan to future fit the UK's 23 million homes. And Arup recently joined the successful Project Leo consortium and working to scope out what could happen in a follow-on project, considering options for improving efficiency at all levels in the energy system. She is an associate at Arup and is the UK Retrofit at Scale Taskforce leader. I hope I've got that right. Following a first degree at Imperial College, Helen has a master's in interdisciplinary design for the built environment from some other place across the other side of the country. And I note she's a hockey enthusiast, and groans aside, I'm hoping to hear how her work will help to bring about a hockey stick improvement in retrofit activity. Over to you.
Thanks very much. Wonderful. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join in person and online. I'm Helene Gosden, an associate at Arup. My background is in interdisciplinary design leadership, and I have a passion for the reuse of existing buildings and assets. And so for those not familiar with Arup, we're a global engineering consultancy firm with headquarters in London. We deliver a broad range of expertise across engineering disciplines and beyond that. And late last year, Arup took a decision to make a significant internal investment in retrofit at scale, which included establishing a task force. Initially, this is UK focused, and the process included recruiting a task force leader to coordinate this effort. And I've been in this role since January, of which more detail to follow within the body of the presentation. But it's through my work in this space that I've had the pleasure of meeting Malcolm McCulloch and working with the local Energy Oxfordshire team in recent months as we expand on the excellent work they've done to date in this area. And this, I believe, is how I received my invitation to be here today. So I'd like to spend the next 30 minutes or so sharing with you our thinking on the retrofit at scale challenge. And I was reflecting over the weekend as I was pulling the slides together that I might have missold this session slightly in the title. I don't have all the answers. No one organisation I think does or can, but I'm going to share with you what at Arup we increasingly believe needs to happen to move the dial in this space. The shifting political landscape and our understanding of the complexity and the interdependencies of the issues changes weekly. And so we're actively reaching out to collaborate with other organisations, and I'd very much welcome thoughts, comments and questions, be those at the end or as we go through, feel free. That's not what was supposed to happen. That's okay. There we go. So what do I mean by retrofit at scale? This is the recognition that in the order of 80% of the buildings which we will occupy in 2050 already exist and require to be decarbonised in order to meet our net zero commitments. The focus of my presentation this evening is on homes, but you will see later that the opportunities are broader than this. And in a post-carbon political landscape, as some have described it, I think we can all agree that we need to retrofit the majority of homes in the UK with great pace and great scale, rather than discounting more energy to blindly keep going as we are. I'll take the liberty of a little bit of history to set, sharing a little bit of history to set the scene, acknowledging the expertise within the audience, but allowing us to move quickly, hopefully, from the topic of why are we doing this to how should we do this. So Arup worked with the UK Green Building Council on their whole life carbon roadmap, a pathway to net zero. The graph above on the screen clearly shows the required trajectory of the built environment's net carbon emissions, and indeed the significant contribution of the domestic sector. The red is the embodied aspect of domestic, and the dark purple is the operational emissions. The only way to achieve this step change is deep collaboration, and the biggest problem currently is fragmentation. In the domestic sector, one might consider here that we actually have in excess of 20 million separate clients, all requiring to retrofit their homes to improve thermal efficiency and reduce demand in order to achieve net zero. This is not a space in which Arup have historically operated or been able to influence, but we can see that this needs a systematic and programmatic approach. And we need to treat this as a vast infrastructure project with which Arup is perhaps more familiar. The climate crisis requires the built environment to decarbonise at pace and scale. And what's clear from this required trajectory is that we need to act now. Immediate action is absolutely critical. However, it has been our belief from the outset of the conversations that we've held internally that the potential investment in retrofit of homes and neighbourhoods at this scale could and should deliver far wider benefits. And the global political climate has thrust many of these to the forefront of public attention. And we see the momentum gathering rapidly towards a need for a coordinated transition plan to future ready or future fit homes and places. Only 7 months ago, this was a decarbonisation or net zero issue, largely aiming to reduce heat loss and transition homes to low carbon heat sources. Poor living conditions associated with damp, mould and air quality, as well as fire safety reform, make this a quality of life issue as well. The record-breaking temperatures of summer 2022 mean climate adaptation measures are equally important and will also drive retrofit to address overheating. And with energy prices increasing as a result of geopolitical instability, the challenge is shifting and becoming ever more urgent for occupiers. So now is the time to look differently at the challenge of making homes future ready. Despite this uncertainty, a number of alterations must be made to our homes, and we must coordinate action to deliver cost efficiencies and to minimise disruption for occupiers. Any home transition plan must include smart energy demand management, water efficiency upgrades, vehicle charging and much more. Active coordination as part of a multi-outcome programme can optimise the cost to benefit ratios and minimise disruption. All of these are powerful drivers towards a need for collective action at national level. The UK GBC roadmap further shows the predicted rollout and typical S-curve distribution which we might expect as we innovate to improve and refine the process through our collective efforts. Key here is that it is not a linear progression between now and 2028. Something like 60% of the homes in the UK need to be retrofitted in a 6-year window in line with this S-curve. So assuming 28 million existing dwellings, according to the UK GBC figures, that's 16 million homes in 6 years, which feels a little overwhelming. But I don't think it's impossible. If you'll pardon some quite rudimentary maths, we can further furnish ourselves with the following figures. There are 215 top-tier local authorities in the UK, and over a 6-year period, 16 million homes breaks down to approximately 13,000 homes per year over those 6 years. So suddenly, perhaps it's not quite so daunting, although I recognise that it's not an equal distribution across all local authorities. My father-in-law used to say, "We do not have a problem, we have an opportunity." And with scale comes significant opportunity, but we need to stop thinking so small. We must act at scale to transform more homes and widen the benefits. From insulating a whole street simultaneously, to shared heat pumps and energy storage infrastructure, through to enabling efficient, genuinely large-scale delivery. And here I'm going to introduce the concept of a place-based approach. This is a people-centred, bottom-up approach which addresses the unique needs of a community in one given location by working together with the best available local resources, knowledge and insight to deliver local regeneration. And this is important because there is a scale of scale. From street level to neighbourhood to city to region to national, the impact can be best achieved with leadership and engagement at different levels depending on the challenge. But scale solutions that are place-based can drive improvements not just in homes, but also the local economy and public realm. And we need to kind of share this message, and we need to make more people excited about the positive impact and potential change on their lives. I would like to turn now to examine in a little bit more detail the system, i.e. the elements required to work together to generate the results we want or that we need to change. We at Arup have tried to visualize this system, not least in order to have a framework within which we can hang our projects, we can talk to our clients, and we can frame our calls to action, sorry. My colleague Becky has developed this diagram, the idea of a whole country retrofit plan, which is a pun on the concept of whole house retrofit plan, for those who are familiar. And this problem, this system, is much broader than Fabric First, although it of course has its part to play. We can easily see that the home is part of a system that includes the heat, power and energy supply, the public realm and the local economy. There is a need to consider not only climate mitigation, but also adaptation, to consider who pays and how to influence behavioural change. The diagram contains a lot of information, but it strives to simplify an incredibly complex system and identify the opportunities for impact. And the most impact which we can deliver, we believe, is through smart triangulation of these areas. Taking data as an example. So we're moving towards much smarter ways to store information about buildings. We have the golden thread requirements from the Building Safety Bill, and we need to operate our buildings much more like finely tuned systems. We need to train a new construction workforce, kind of reference to your point, Robin, from last week, to see buildings differently as systems, and we need to make that more mission orientated, link them to climate action roles. We put forward that there might be two engines to this, data and policy and communication, which in turn drive the money and the behaviour. We recognise that there are parallel and interconnected work streams which will drive transformational change and further optimise benefits. Within Arup, I have discovered over the last 10 years, as I was saying, just celebrated my 10-year anniversary, that whatever you're looking to discuss, you will invariably find someone who is incredibly well qualified and enthusiastic to talk to you about this. And as task force lead in my role over the last few months, much of my time has been seeking out and connecting these parties, these expertise around this agenda. But we also recognise the importance of collaboration, of diversity of thought and perspectives, and the power of collective action. So we are investing ourselves and we're working with external collaborators to explore a number of key themes or questions, which we believe will help to unlock the system. The first is, what does a place-based approach look like that will go beyond improvements to the fabric of buildings and catalyse neighbourhood regeneration, improving quality of life? Secondly, what does the data backbone look like upon which we build and measure progress? Thirdly, how can this work be financed in a manner that ensures access to all and a just transition? And fourthly, what new skills are required and from where can they be sourced? In April 2022, when I initiated many of these conversations, there were 4 main focus areas, but as the research has developed, 2 more have been added. We're now looking also at materials and acknowledging that we need to start innovating our materials supply chain now, so that all action can happen with limited further harm to the environment. We're also well aware of the impact and the opportunity to influence and the need to influence people. We will fail if we don't stay people focused, understanding our end users, their motivations and their behaviours. All of this recognises that we need robust long-term leadership and policy to provide the stability and confidence right down the value chain, from investors to the supply chain and the homeowners themselves. And finally, if I just go back to the top of the slide, the delivery model itself is key. This represents the need for a distributed national infrastructure project, similar in scale to high-speed rail or to the Olympic Park, but with many, many more stakeholders. So having set out the problem, I would like to share an example of a place-based approach. So that very carefully, because my husband thought I was saying place-based when I was rehearsing it last night. A place-based approach in practice, and the concept of net zero neighbourhoods. This is somewhat of a misnomer, perhaps, because this is a model which delivers well beyond carbon and climate mitigation and allows us to grab the opportunity to deliver aggregated benefits, address inequity, and in particular, the United Nations Sustainability Development Goal number 11, which is to deliver safe and affordable housing for all. So I'd like to share with you some work that we've recently completed with Wolverhampton as part of an initiative led by West Midlands Combined Authority. It's a great example of local leadership in this space, particularly when it comes to some of the challenges in delivering retrofit. We were commissioned to prepare a net zero neighbourhood demonstrator delivery plan for the Graiseley ward of Wolverhampton. This programme is part of their strategy to cut regional carbon emissions to net zero by 2041. I mean, this target alone highlights the need to retrofit nearly 300,000 homes in Wolverhampton by 2026. The programme is specifically in response to issues faced on existing initiatives. So whilst they've been designed to encourage individual households to take up deep retrofit and cleaner heating technologies, those that have been in place historically have not generated change at the necessary scale or pace. The costs and disruptions caused by making changes to individual homes currently outweigh the short and medium-term benefits, at least in the eyes of the homeowners. So West Midlands Combined Authority made a rallying call for a different approach, and they have defined a net zero neighbourhood as a place that reduces energy demand, decarbonises energy, and undertakes wider measures to create sustainable places. It aims to take a place-based approach to decarbonisation to evidence a scalable investment case for systemic rather than piecemeal interventions. And you can see there that they had identified 1.65 million in funds to be awarded to the successful project. City of Wolverhampton Council had selected Graiseley ward for the programme, and we were then asked to prepare a delivery plan to set out a vision with clear place-based outcomes and principles to guide delivery for the whole ward and for the phase 1 pilot area, which is so Graiseley is the dark line, the black line around the outside, and the pilot area is within the red boundary. This area needs positive intervention, with large areas of the ward listed in the 10% most deprived areas nationally. It ranks highly on the combined scores of fuel poverty and the rate of low energy performance certificate properties in Wolverhampton. But its diversity of place and people is a strength, which allows a broad range of interventions to be trialled at scale and pace with different communities. The programme aligns with the city's strategic ambitions to be at the centre of the levelling up agenda, to be the UK's national centre for sustainable construction and a key partner in the West Midlands 3 Cities Retrofit Initiative, Birmingham and Coventry, accelerating green growth and addressing decarbonisation. The delivery plan sets out an understanding of the local area, and it also includes a capital investment plan, a project delivery plan, and a community engagement plan. This table here summarises the framework which we developed and applied to this case study. The questions are quite general, but you can see how we are able to use them to tease out the unique aspects of the neighbourhood and the place in question. So we engage with the stakeholders around the type of place that they're looking to create, including gaining an understanding of the characteristics of the existing neighbourhood to understand the baseline. What steps are required to develop that vision into something tangible through options appraisal and development of an investment plan? How they will fund or finance it, looking at both public and private sources, and how it will ultimately be delivered. What does the place-based solution look like for Graiseley? So the next 2 slides are from the presentation that we delivered at the end, and just show you some of the wider interventions and also take a look at the home retrofit interventions too. So as well as setting out a plan for the whole ward, which is over 5,000 homes, we also had to provide details of interventions for the 1.65 million as part of phase 1. We proposed a targeted approach to focus on a specific area to address the needs of the programme to show scale and pace. And we set key criteria to identify the area in Graiseley in most need of early intervention, which we would then designate as the pilot, which would include the house type, looking at the house types, the heating demand, the levels of fuel poverty and deprivation, and access to nearby amenities. And on this basis, the Lime Street area was selected. So that's this kind of a zoom in there of that red outline that you saw on the previous slide. The Arup approach was inspired by the Green and Thriving Neighbourhoods publication, which we authored on behalf of C40 cities, among other reference works. And this provided us with a framework to enable change and transition to net zero lifestyles within buildings and within the community. So a list of interventions that aimed to achieve that sustained ongoing change was developed, from retrofit to the street and local infrastructure, with overall quality of place enhancements. And you can see that these indicated on the plan, with the key on the left, including green walking routes, cycle racks, EV charging, and also rewilding initiatives. It's much more an overview of improvements to the public realm than perhaps looking at the individual homes alone. But we also needed to allocate the budget to certain interventions to the homes. So looking at retrofit, we identified two types. Firstly, measures to firstly showcase the change and level of works required to achieve the net zero deep retrofit. And this was in 15 identified homes, including full building insulation and air source heat pumps. This is expected to form an example for the local community and other neighbourhoods to visit, so a true demonstrator in that sense. And it will also reveal pain points with local coordination, supply chain engagement, and will help the stakeholders identify the real challenges and solutions to unlock the at-scale work. And the second group of measures for the targeted retrofit was around a cluster of 114 homes. But this typology was focused on low disruption. Low disruption measures including loft insulation, perhaps solar PV on the roofs, with cost-effective fabric interventions and potentially high bill savings for the house occupants. I also wanted to look briefly, though it's a complex subject, at how we're developing a funding model for the plan. So a foundational point for funding a net zero neighbourhood is that the programme whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and leveraging this is key. It's a complicated picture at the moment when it comes to public sector funding, with a focus on individual projects. However, without private sector participation, public sector funding would be inadequate to generate a holistic and sustainable net zero neighbourhood programme. Key to this investment, therefore, is 1, private sector buy-in to the objectives of the programme. 2, identifying revenue generating assets within the net zero neighbourhood approach for repayment purposes. And 3, ensuring that a reasonable rate of return is possible for long-term finance. And long-term finance are looking for relatively low return on investment. It's referred to as patient capital. We looked at case studies for local green bonds, community share offers, community trusts, and revolving funds, and we identified an approach that mapped out different phases and the recommendations for finance associated with each phase, which is what you can see there on the right-hand side. Arup worked very closely with the council, and we submitted the delivery plan in July. We've reflected in this slide on some of the key takeaways from the project, which I'd like to share with you. In particular, an emphasis on the fact that this is not just another capital programme. They had not delivered the change required or through capital programmes. So in addition to capital interventions in retrofit, transport and green infrastructure, we've embedded 20% operational costs into the programme, which will include research, programme management and community engagement, which provides for a more comprehensive plan. It addresses different housing types, but also different tenures. As a demonstrator, we felt it was key to show a way that which we could deliver a retrofit across tenures with a focus on private rented sector in this area in particular, because it was particularly high, as well as different housing typologies. This type of accommodation presents its own challenges in delivering retrofit. Aiming for net zero, we developed an approach which showed an understanding of the local area and its assets, including an estimated carbon emissions profile to monitor progress and the contribution that net zero interventions can have to placemaking and creating sustainable communities. We reference the need for private finance and investment, but what do we mean by this? I'm an engineer by training, and I'm not an economist, but I have been on a steep learning curve for the last few months. And I'm going to share some high-level concepts as developed and put forward by my colleagues. This is my way of saying, please don't ask me difficult questions. On the one hand, we have an existential crisis and the demand for capital to help us to address this. On the other hand, we have in the order of $3.6 trillion. And if we look at current exchange rates, we're probably saying that that is well over £3 trillion of committed capital by patient investors that have yet to find viable investments in which to invest. But how to bring this money to the projects? So we've been working as part of a collaboration with Bankers Without Boundaries and Eunomia on a commission for 3CI, which is the City's Commission for Climate Investment, to develop an outline business case which justifies a 3-stack model of blended funding, portfolio investment, and aggregated benefits. We see on the left, under the funding, there are various sources, both public sector and private sector. And in the centre, there are various assets. Some offer an obvious stable return on investment, and others are less easy to justify economically. For example, the thermal efficiency measures on individual homes. The funders, hence we ring fence those into a portfolio, and this is administered by the local authority in agreement with other stakeholders through an investment, a FinCo, a kind of a special purpose vehicle. The funders put money into a pot, and those funds are then split out at the discretion of the FinCo. The returns are delivered back into the pot and redistributed back to investors according to the terms of their specific agreement. Return is generated by the reduction in energy bills, and I'll just provide something of a kind of a quantitative example of that because I think it helps to explain it. But there's a parallel delivery arm or an OPCO in the centre to manage the rollout of the works. So if, say, currently you or I are paying £300 a month for your gas to heat your home, under the net zero neighbourhoods model, or the blended finance model, depending on how you want to refer to it, the OPCO arranged for the retrofit works to be done to your home. Your energy costs are now paid directly back to the FinCo at, say, £150 a month, because your demand has gone down. And you additionally pay towards the community assets of, if we set a payment of, say, £75 a month, also to the FinCo. This leaves you with £75 a month of savings. So note that this is a property contract that sits within the property, that sits with the property and not with the individual. So if you then sell the property, that liability moves to the person who has purchased the property from you. Once the investment in the community asset is returned, that portion of the monthly saving also goes directly to the owner. And the term of this arrangement is currently estimated to be in the order of 20 years, but it will depend on the scale of the community investment, and which is dependent on the place, hence the sort of need to reflect some nuance around the place-based approach. And so to data, because apart from anything else, finance of this scale demands rigor and robust measurement and forecasting of the impact of the interventions to underwrite and provide confidence in the return on investment. Data is key. And to support this model, we feel that the ownership and framework for the management of data should sit centrally and be accessible to everyone, because it's also key to continuous learning at a technical level and also to drive uptake and behaviour change. The data we gather from making these interventions should allow us to baseline, benchmark, track progress and forecast more accurately with each iteration and each new regional venture. And unfortunately, don't have time to go into a lot of detail of all of the elements that we are researching at this time this evening. I do want to quickly touch on jobs. If the Treasury handed over several £billion tomorrow and asked us all just to crack on with retrofitting the homes in the UK, who would do this work? This slide is from the National Retrofit Strategy produced by the Construction Leadership Council, and it shows the projected scale of skilled labour and trades required in the installation alone, never mind the design and the kind of all the other aspects of the ecosystem as well for necessary retrofit interventions. And it's broadly in line with the S-curve distribution that we saw earlier. The lack of stable policy to date has been a significant blocker to development of a mature supply chain of both material and labour, because it's widely accepted that most of these individuals do not yet exist, have not yet been trained. We need to build capacity and we need to grow demand in parallel, or we risk unintended consequences, such as those which we see in Italy. So Italy have a super bonus scheme, which offers homeowners up to 110% of the costs of their work to cover thermal efficiency measures, and this is primarily aimed at works to the facade. The uptake has been really strong, unsurprisingly, if you're being offered 110% of the cost of the project. And so that's great from the point of view of the planet, but the policy was introduced initially for 2 years and has been extended year by year several times. So the supply chain has not received the clear long-term signals and the capacity has not been built, which has led to inflation of costs and lead times, as an example on scaffolding in city centres, of up to 6 months, because there is so much demand for limited resource. So there are lessons to be learned globally as each nation has and will be tackling this challenge in their own context. So referring back to the start of my presentation, I stated that to address this challenge, we must collaborate, and that the biggest challenge we face is fragmentation. A diverse spread of building typologies, different tenures, different levels of interest and affordability, a supply chain consisting in the majority of sole traders, small and micro businesses, and an absence of long-term signals and available finance. We need a plan. We need a plan that recognises, firstly, the need for different approaches to social housing, owner-occupiers and owner-let. Secondly, the diversity and capacity of organisations involved. All are part of the jigsaw, but we need to align our efforts, and leadership and coordination is essential. We need to communicate the picture on the outside of the jigsaw puzzle. Thirdly, the urgency and scale of the challenge, which is equivalent to an infrastructure project such as HS2. So, as an example, in the National Retrofit Strategy, the Construction Leadership Council estimate a cost of in the order of £525 billion over 20 years to retrofit these 28 million homes. Crossrail recently opened and has cost just over £18 billion over 15 years since its original budget was approved, and HS2 Phase 1 has a budget of just below £45 billion. The point is that retrofit of housing stock dwarfs Crossrail and requires, we feel, I'm sure many others in the room do as well, an unprecedented infrastructure programme. And fourthly, the plan needs to embrace the opportunity to address inequity and SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal 11, for safe and affordable housing. So we come back to the programmatic approach required for this infrastructure programme, and furthermore, a model that enables and supports local leadership, because a lot of this is already flourishing. Local authorities and community groups all over the country are taking action and getting on with some of this work. Some areas, such as Oxford, Leeds and Edinburgh, are blazing a trail. Leo is pioneering decentralised local energy solutions with trials across the county and also recognising the importance of community engagement and behaviours. But what they need is support in removing the constraints that are limiting their growth. Others know that they need to take action, but they may be struggling to know where to start. And we have had a number of those conversations with local authorities coming to us and just saying, I just don't know where to even begin. And they would benefit hugely from knowledge transfer from others. So drawing on our experience and our conversations with client bodies across the ecosystem, we're advocating for a national retrofit assembly, or an entity, kind of name as yet undetermined, to support regions and local authorities. A key function of which is to create a stable and supportive policy environment. And quite possibly we actually need this entity to help us to dismantle some existing structures. Our view is that this national entity is needed to bring together money, although with the Finco model, you could argue that this could be devolved, to bring together technical knowledge, programme management ability and data. And the role of that body is not to push top-down solutions. It is to enable delivery and share knowledge, for which data management is also key. So my closing thoughts. Firstly, I just can't reiterate enough the importance of collaboration in this space. I found this Piotr Droz diagram on LinkedIn, and it is an example of a great simple diagram that cuts to the heart of a complex issue. I'm not saying it will be easy, but we need to find ways of working that transcend existing transactional business models. So we, in various conversations and relationships that we are involved with at the moment, are grappling with this, but it needs everyone to have the same mindset. Secondly, the significance of applying a place-based approach. I heard Polly Billington, who is the CEO of UK 100, which is a network of UK towns and cities, speak recently on a podcast, and she emphasised the need for central policy to support and enable local leadership. Local leaders understand the particular needs of their communities and are capable of building and of holding trust. And when your delivery model addresses the needs of a particular geography, that's when we stand to deliver the most transformational, regenerative change. And the place-based model that considers not only homes, but also the heat and power infrastructure, commercial enterprise, public realm, local skills and supply chain, and also builds an investable proposition. Because thirdly, unlocking private investment in net zero assets is key. There is billions, if not trillions, of patient capital seeking long-term return on investment, and we need to give them the means and the confidence to invest in place. I'm certainly not saying that ours is the only model, but the principles of a blended finance model for a net zero neighbourhood speak to a systems approach to a systems challenge. And finally, we must not forget people. As technical people, we can forget that for much of society, the concept of net zero is perhaps a little bit abstract. They have, for the most part, more pressing issues, and we need to be user-focused and recognise that not everyone may understand the need or be as ready for change as we may be. We need to collaborate across sectors, and we also need to communicate and to tell a compelling story. On which note, I hope that I have provided you with a compelling narrative, which explains our vision for Retrofit at Scale. That is a system-led, place-based approach to a systems challenge. Thank you very much for listening.
I think one of the messages I heard from that is to do it with people rather than to people. So to me, there's a little bit of messaging that needs to come from all directions about how this is a positive change for everyone. To what extent do you think there's a challenge around the messaging, because people have been using the need for change as being a bad thing rather than talking about a positive future? So just a general question about how the messaging around the change that is needed being a positive change. Have you thought about what that messaging looks like?
Yeah, well, I think we're in this bizarre situation where actually Vladimir Putin may have done the climate a favour by pushing energy prices up in the way that they are, which has brought a different lens to the challenge, and it makes it that much more tangible for people on a day-to-day basis. We were having a conversation a few months ago with the chair of our region, and he said, we were explaining all of our work and thinking to him, and he said, we may just end up achieving decarbonisation by stealth. And I think in some ways we possibly just need to embrace that, and we need to go out and engage with people, and quite possibly there's a national government level campaign that needs to happen that says, if you want your energy bills to come down, the answer is to insulate your homes and to move across to green energy, and you will see the benefits. And actually it won't only be in your bills, it will also be to your wider community. But as much as it pains me to say it, because I am completely committed to the net zero agenda, I'm not sure that that is the thing that will engage the public most.
I will open to questions in a second, but my other question is, you may have given an impression of a faith that we have all the solutions available. So to me, one of the questions is, how much more learning do we need to be doing before we can deliver? Rather than saying, we know what to do, let's just go and do it. So what's the balance between what learning is still needed as part of the process?
I think at a technical level, we broadly know what we need to do, in particular to homes and the grid infrastructure. What we don't know is necessarily, we can't prove what the impact of scale will be. We can do stochastic modelling and we can model various scenarios where we say, if we put double glazing in this tranche of homes and if we put a heat pump in this tranche of homes, this is what we think it would do to the energy demand. But because of the behaviour aspect, you really can't predict that. And so what we're really pushing for is action. And what we're looking to do is to try and actually be in a space that perhaps haven't traditionally operated in, but about project creation, where we have a client base and we also have collaborators and other organisations with whom we work who could potentially bring technical expertise and finance to the challenge, and bringing those together to drive demonstrators, deliver demonstrators. I think that's where the learning will come that we can't do on a theoretical level.
Thank you. Sorry, Chairman's privilege there. Please, bring me some questions.
Just stop sharing.
Yeah. Sorry, Malcolm, you had your hand up first, I think.
So, Helena, to me, there are two nitty-gritty questions which you kind of skirted over. First of all, is not only is every home different, but every resident has different perspectives of their home. And how does one deal with that? Because that sounds horrendously complex to solve. The second one is the supply chain is extremely fragmented, really different. And Gavin, I'm sure, will say a lot more about that. How does one manage that play? Those are kind of, for me, two hard questions, or many hard questions in this space. So I'm not expecting answers, but I'm expecting thoughts.
No, they're good challenges. So to the first point, I think that is one of the benefits that we perceive of the sort of blended finance model, where you set up this FinCo and you take into ownership, effectively, don't take into ownership, you create a portfolio of all of these assets, which then are upgraded by the funding that is provided from external sources. And I mean, there are details to work through in terms of, should those who can afford to do the work not be contributing something towards it. But fundamentally, that private finance and that blended model should allow the work to the homes and the properties to be done at minimal cost to the residents. And I would hope that, I know cost is not the only deterrent, but I would hope that would start to address that problem.
But how do you do the individuality of each of the houses? That's all the homes on the outside might look the same.
Yeah.
But when you go inside, everybody's, they've been around for 60 years and everybody's bashed a wall here and put a loft on there and then different inside. How does one manage that complexity?
I think you can't get away from the fact that you would need to be under the kind of the OPCO world. You would need to be going in and surveying everybody's homes. But I think there's also, and this is one of the things that we'd love to explore through the kind of pilots, there's a data-driven, a data-led approach to that, which would allow for some kind of scale to that approach as well, where you might, I mean, yes, every house on a street might be different, but in a neighbourhood, there must be some repetition that you can start to. You can go in, scan a property, and the database will be able to tell you that there are similar properties that you can start to learn from. And your other point was about supply chain.
I'll let others, let others come. We can talk.
So my question is more about the methodology and how we can track emissions, since your goal is net zero. And I'm just wondering how that is done. I mean, if you're bringing a tree, planting a tree, or installing an EV charger, how can you estimate the reduction in emissions? How can you estimate that? Any model do you use?
Yeah, so
Take into account the product life cycle as well.
yes, so embodied carbon is a kind of a consideration. And when I mentioned about materials, I think there's a recognition that actually, yes, we're reusing these buildings, we're extending their life, but we're also layering in more embodied carbon with all of these products that we're putting into the buildings. And so we do need to be investing in the development of nature-based products as well. To a point about measuring emissions in the public realm. So a lot of the work that went into the business case, the 3CI business case development that has looked at, I wonder if on the slide, there was the funding and then the investment and then the value on the right hand side, the value delivered. And the challenge, the biggest challenge of that business case piece was how to monetize the value delivered of some of the points you're just making. And I don't know all of the detail, but I do know that there was a strong focus on air quality and actually using air quality as a metric that would then show improvements in health outcomes that would then could be linked to the cost to the NHS, for example, of not doing the interventions. Actually, it was more looking at the terminology was there. Effectively, the cost of the do nothing scenario rather than trying to measure what the benefits are.
Sorry, not time to answer
That's a question. It's
Sarah?
that one.
Oh, that's
Outcomes. So the social environmental impacts, how you actually measure that box was one of the biggest challenges of the piece of work.
Sarah.
Thanks for making the case for a space approach to things, which makes sense in so many ways when you think that actually all transitions are same like all news, and also that it's local authorities and localities that best appreciate multiple benefits. When we talk about the people-centered approach, seem to be talking mostly about the end user. And I wondered how that would change if the people you thought of are the people who are actually going to do the work, who by and large are not going to be Arup. They're going to be much more messy, small operations, and what my esteemed colleague refers to as contract builders. And you know, and
I said that for once.
it's out there now again.
So it feels like the sort of thing you only need to say once. But
just want to remove the mental image.
Where was I?
The people on the
supply chain.
people on the ground do delivery.
And we're a long way from having what I guess what we'd love to have, which is an enormous core of highly, solidly skilled, high morale builders who are out there and seen and respected for doing a great job for the country. We're also in a situation where training picture is often dismal. Colleges of further education have their funding starved from over and the prospects are really quite poor. So if you to actually focus on builders as people in, my rambling question goes, where are you getting with politics that and talking like they want?
So I appreciate I only really had one slide about the skills and supply chain aspects, but there are kind of multiple strands of conversations that we're having, and we know that others are as well. One of the concepts that some collaborators of ours, Dark Matter Labs, I don't know if you've come across them, the sort of disruptors, how I would describe them. I mean, they are brilliant thinkers, but they like to come to a problem in a very different way to how an engineering consultancy probably would. They're talking about the idea of learning cities, and they've done some work with Royal Academy or Royal Society, I can't remember now, but on that idea, which is to say, actually, formal training is probably not the answer. It's working out how, again, with some sort of smart infrastructure, you can accredit people for the work that they are doing live. So it just makes it, because it is a big investment of time for a sole trader or a small business to go and do more training. Is there a way that they can do something much more in a much smarter way and interactively that allows them to get accreditation for the work, the portfolio that they're building up as they go? So they will need to do some CPD, but it's not necessary that they go back in and do more training courses. But that a parallel conversation that we're having also is a for past 2030 and past 2035 to be a lever for bringing the standard up generally. So we were talking to, actually randomly in the context of a piece of work we were doing for the GLA about fire safety and retrofit, we were talking to the National, to the Retrofit Academy. And because we were asking them whether there was any kind of focused fire safety content in the past 2030 and 35 courses. And they said, not explicitly, we refer to the building regs and we refer to a couple of the British standards, but it would be a great thing to weave in. And so I think there's a feedback loop into past 2030, 35, particularly on the public sector procurement side, where there's an opportunity for clients to kind of mandate that those roles are named and visible on projects. And at that point, then you can start to ask to kind of place more, I hesitate to say place more responsibility, but you can start to drive change through the training that you deliver to those named individuals. Answer the question.
No, I have to come back to that in a minute. I'm going to go to Gavin first, if you don't mind, because he might want to dissociate himself from the previous comment. Or the question, I don't know.
No, I don't. No, thank you. There's something about the way you presented your plan. You've got this great thing. It seems comprehensive. It's nice and neat. And in a funny way, that's where I start to have problems.
As you know, it's messy.
Because people have tried this stuff for a long time and it's messy. So I've got lots of questions, but let me ask you this. Have you looked at the evidence report from the Bayes demonstrator pilots that were done 2 or 3 years ago? They chose 6 local areas in England, and I know because I helped doing the report they wrote. And 6 of the 6 areas chosen, of which Cozy Homes Oxfordshire was one of the pilots, people behind Retrofit Works and the National Retrofit Strategy were 3 of the 6 pilots. They were working with, arguably, the people in the country who, if anybody can make it work, were going to make it work. And when I went to a seminar by some of the people from Retrofit Works, there were lots of things they talked about, but the thing I will pick out was what they call the funnel of death. So business models, you're probably familiar with this kind of chasm of valley of death in innovations and how you get across. And this was the point that they had to have more than 100 leads, educating people, taking people on a journey of information and understanding over months and years, but over 100 leads in order to get one project. And the evaluation of those 6 demonstrator pilots across the country was none of them actually achieved any of the targets that they had been set. They were also on time, by the way, like a separate story. And so, yeah, if you're going to do the demonstrator, what is it that you're going to learn from these other 6 demonstrators that haven't been?
And in defence of the household, I've heard of multiple visits to ask the same questions, take the same measurement in exactly those projects. So not necessarily all the skills were present at the time. So
I don't think anyone was blameless in this particular set.
I'm just thinking a funnel could have been a bit narrower with somebody up front who knew what they were doing. Sorry, I'm just trying to give you some time to think.
No, it's fine. So I'm thinking about how to answer maybe 2 parts. So the first, what's kind of what have we learned perhaps from those. So the slide that I showed, the donut one, well, this one I have shared at other presentations that I've actually delivered with Russell Smith from Retrofit Works, where he's come and talked about the problems in the supply chain. And then we have workshopped with clients with him this concept of the national entity. And he kind of shared, not necessarily that we were completely on the same page, but I think one of the things that he highlighted was that this lack of any stable policy over time, and the fact that that means that the supply chain can't commit to kind of gearing up. And so I think the thing why we think this could be different is not that necessarily net zero neighbourhoods alone is going to solve the problem, but that actually we feel that all of these strands together need to progress, including the long-term signalling from central government. Having said that, we've also kind of discussed scenarios where we say, well, what if central government, or if there were no public funding at all, like how could we just go out and do this ourselves? And that's kind of why we then start to look at some of the ways of attracting private finance too. So that's what I would say to the point about kind of why is it different. I have not read the report about the Bayes demonstrators from 6 years ago that you referenced. I will go and do so. But yeah, I think that probably the point is that what we're saying is not the answer in its own right. There need to be a lot of other. We need to grow the market at the same time as we're increasing the. We need to grow the supply chain at the same time as we're increasing the demand. Those two things need to happen in parallel. No, yeah. I feel that no, I feel, but I do feel that the policy is quite key to that. Quite how.
We need to look back at Gavin's talk about the supply chain. So, Chris, so I'll come to you in a second, Nick. But Chris, you had a question at the back. Is that right?
Yes. Can I ask you about the numbers and belongs control? You said the total bill might be around 28 million homes. You mentioned at the start. That's do you think that's a reasonable figure? Deep retrofit. Do the economics then stack up?
So those figures were taken from the Construction Leadership Council document, and they were sort of there to illustrate a point, I suppose. I wouldn't say that I completely necessarily endorse those numbers, but I would say we are doing some research into extracting data from live projects to try and work out what we think a typical band for deep retrofit and light retrofit might be. But it's so hard to kind of categorize what those things are. Like, what do you define as deep retrofit and what's light retrofit, and where do you sit in between? What I would say is that the 18 or 19,000, based on, for example, figures that are coming out of Energiesprong demonstrators, is far too low.
I was going to say, I mean, Energiesprong is coming in at roughly 1,000.
Yeah, but I think Energiesprong as a full deep retrofit is not appropriate for every home. And so as a median, sort of an average figure, you are looking at something lower than that. And I think you will, if you are able to deliver at the, and I think, because I think it was Russell who largely authored the CLC document, one of the assumptions that they'd taken into their modelling was that there would be economies of scale. If you can deliver, if you can ensure the stable policy to allow the supply chain to ramp up, to then allow innovation through production, through rollout and consistency of detailing, for example, all of these things that could offer you efficiency, that you might start to bring down the costs.
Just a quick supplementary. You've got that experiment which you intend to do. The 15 houses for deep retrofit plan there. What figure have you put in the cost of doing that? It's quite extensive.
Yeah, that's.
In the deep.
I think that was on this. Maybe it wasn't on the slide. No, okay, there is a slide that sits behind this that I can dig out. And I will do at the end, if that's okay. It's on my laptop.
I don't know if you remember the AIM C4, which was how much would it cost just to improve homes to the sustainable code level 4. Most of the money got spent on fixing problems with the house that had no effect on the energy efficiency at all. So by the time they'd spent all their money, they still haven't reached the point at which they're improving the performance of the homes. There's a kind of a slight iceberg element of some basic remediation works that might also need to be done. It's not good. Sorry.
That's
That's
the
fine.
opportunity.
Yes, it is arguably the opportunity. If you're looking for that, can we go to Nick with a question as
by
well?
all means, yeah.
Yeah.
Those curves and we did 2 million retrofits a year. We did 2 million. But that took about 1994 to 2010 get there, so 16 years to flat ramp up for relatively straightforward. I think tools of quality control, train. I mean, training county was 6 weeks of training in the gas engine. They were relatively simple, but I just worry about those curves that are back shape. The experience of building technologies shows that they rarely get that stick. The second is on finance. And I always worry, and I'm not accusing you of this, but I think that the 3CI thinking they are bankers. They do think that the problem is finance, and those who lived through the Green Deal know that the problem is never finance. And the problem was the stuff we've been talking about, people, something. And making concrete some of that list of finance outcomes that you showed, some of which are completely intangible, like environmental and social benefits. They're great to have. I mean, they should be the driver, but you can't turn them into pound notes. And you actually can't turn tax receipts into pound notes either, because the Treasury will just, as a matter of principle, will not give them back. So I mean, what looks like a nice model economically doesn't necessarily work financially. The question is about deep retrofit and fabric first. So some of my Chris colleagues in ECL are really challenging that we do that fabric first is now right for most homes if we're going to basically a heat pump driven heating system. You know, have you got any thoughts about what of how most houses have got some loft. Most houses with cavities have got filled cavity. We're talking about solid wall insulation. What sort of numbers of solid wall insulations do we need to do, or can we just bung in heat pumps? There's certainly some heat pumps in the area I live in that Robin lives in.
Sorry if I make that's partly because of the decarbonisation of the electricity supply. So now the carbon content being decoupled.
No, I don't mean that. I mean just to heat the building. There's a sort of myth out there to do a deep refurbishment. But heat pump, and now there's an opposed view that actually you don't need to do much more insulation in many buildings in order to put. I just wondered where you thought the engine space was on.
I am probably not the best person to talk to about that. But I have colleagues in our energy team who would take a view on it. I'm going to do a politician and not actually answer the question, but the point that strikes me with you saying about heat pumps and the fabric first approach actually being appropriate is my feeling is that you then miss the opportunity for those wider benefits if you just do, at the same time. I recognise that we need to decarbonising these homes will be no regrets to a point from a carbon point of view. Like if we can't rather than do nothing, we absolutely should do that. But I think if we can strive for a model where we can deliver a lot of wider benefits as well, then we probably should.
I think that's my concern, though, as Chris didn't actually point out, but could have done. The number of homes that go to net zero in this project is 15, right? 4.65. If you cross out solar PV and put in heat, you could get 130 to net zero. That's a very, very different way.
Yeah, solar PV and the pump.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
what would have to the
I
bill
agree
in the meantime?
Yeah, so I guess question being, yeah, do you need to do all of those things in order to achieve similar outcomes?
We don't really so
No, but I think a sort of, again, that sort of community level, if you're producing energy as well, then that's a benefit that's away from the home. That's a benefit that's for the wider community. And I think that's probably what sits behind trying to implement that at the same time. And the last point, sorry, about heat pumps, sort of, at least my observation that there's also that behaviour aspect as well. So the assumptions that your colleagues are kind of making on the ability of the heat pump without the insulation to actually deliver similar outcomes requires people to understand how to use the heat pump properly. Yeah.
Well, you might have a high temperature. The performance is the other version. So there's a whole lot of complicated stuff.
I'm going to let John ask a question.
I think I might be very close to the camera.
Yeah, just one technology that you haven't talked about. I don't know if it's because it's just dead, but heat networks. And so it'd be quite interesting, you know, if you think there is a role for those. The second question that I have, a few years ago, I was asked to write a piece about the governance and regulation for low carbon networks generally. I think one of the issues that came up, and it was in the context of heat networks, was what I call compulsion versus choice. If you're doing a neighbourhood, what happens if some people want to opt out and say, no, I don't want your heat network, I'm going to have my own air source heat pump. I've got these historical storage radiators. And actually, if you allow people to opt out, it can very quickly undermine the economics of the whole thing. There's so much of it is going to be fixed cost. And then there's sort of, not quite the same, but if you've got a decentralized approach, which I think you're absolutely right, I think it's the only way of heat and retrofit, so on. And you're thinking about thinking in the future about regulating the prices. It happens if some are successful and some are not so successful.
Well, I've got more questions in for your money. Maybe you can pick which ones you want to answer.
I'll try and go through all of them. So the first one about heat networks, again, I'm probably not the technical person, best place to answer the question, but we have been looking with some kind of collaborators in one of the London boroughs at what one of their future neighbourhood schemes might look like. And we've been talking about the opportunity to put in shared ground source heat pumps and then how that might work in terms of tapping off, providing connection points, either for residents to take up that opportunity now, or when, if they've just installed a brand new boiler and they might not want to change anything particularly now, but they might want to have the opportunity in the future to do that. So that absolutely has gone into the thinking, and in the options appraisal, I think that was considered here as well. But you then run into other challenges about where will you put them, or if you had a sort of a shared heat pump, shared air source heat pump, where would that go, and how would the distribution work, and the disruption to existing streets as well. So again, it's sort of specific to the place, I think, but we definitely feel that there is place for heat networks. Please remind me of your second point.
The well, it was compulsion versus compulsion versus choice.
So I think you would want to get to a place, and I'm just thinking in the example of the future neighbourhoods piece, they were looking to use the funding available to actually put that infrastructure in, and then provide people with the opportunity further down the line to tap into it if they wanted to. Yeah, I'm not sure whether we have then really thought about that level of detail in the 3CI context or not. But I guess if you're, again, if you're offering to go in and do it up almost with minimal cost to the individual, then you would hope that that uptake was a little bit higher.
And then they feel they should.
I'm just going to take one question from behind you, John. Sorry, you've been patient.
Thanks, Helen. So I'm going to go a little practical, so a little more idea about retrofitting, considering the timeline it will take. So imagine me being a house owner, and then I expect to go ahead with retrofitting my house. But however, there is perhaps the concern around when do you get to the retrofitting? So there are different seasons in the year. Sometimes it's going to be very cold, and then I have retrofitting going, and probably I don't have like heat pumps around to keep me warm. Perhaps I have someone in my ceiling, probably doing too greatly. So what strategy are you going to try to see that you can optimally optimize or optimally ensure retrofitting is being done without affecting the behavior of people or their houses? We plan to inject people out of their houses and retrofit, and tell them to come down. And the second one is perhaps with regards to the solar PV. So there are different roof sizes for different houses, and at the same time, there are different energy demands. So how are you going to possibly see that with the sufficient roof sizes you have, you can optimally be able to supply the energy demands? And perhaps something I picked up from my classes with actually, it's more like the energy service. So how do you see people optimally see how they can provide useful services for the energy they use, rather than just using the energy without having conservation for it?
Okay, your first point about that the actual disruption and managing that and understanding when to do this work and whether you would move people out. I think the community engagement aspect of the whole model is quite key to engage with people, understand what their preferences might be, what their concerns are, and then respond to that. However, we are also doing a kind of a piece of work that again is sort of internally funded, where we're trying to work out what we think a street level delivery model might look like, and what a kind of a use the term disruptive in a sense, but the intention is that the opposite is actually true. So what would we do differently? And so one of my colleagues in the energy team, Alan Thompson, who Malcolm knows, has kind of put forward the idea that actually there's a model where you kind of bring together Virgin Holidays, and you bring together IKEA, and you bring together one of the big Wix or somebody like this, and as a kind of a consortium, you're then able to offer a package that says, let's send you a home for 10 days, 12 days. By the way, why don't you go on holiday for a nice trip somewhere else, and kind of a bit of a sweetener as well. And I appreciate that that is a little bit perhaps outside of the box, but I think in order to achieve the scale that we need to, I think we do need some slightly different approaches to things. So that's kind of one of the things we've been looking at.
I'm going to be really cruel and say, can we end the formal questions here just so we can let the people who are online go as well? And I'm sure we can have a few more questions in a moment just when we finish. Thanks again very much for
Thank you for
some
having me.
thought-provoking conversation. Thank you very much. So for people online, just to mention, we're keen to encourage this kind of discussion, so please come into the room next time if at all possible. We'll continue to live stream, but really it's much more about being in the room. You can always catch up the bits you missed afterwards when the recordings go live, thanks to Anne. And a reminder, last seminar this term will be from, which was going to be from John Barrett, has been postponed to January. He's got some excuse like receiving OBE or whatever it is, so we all understand that. So we have a change of focus next week. Last seminar will be talk postponed from Trinity term, and Tim Stone, chairman of the Nuclear Industry Association, will be looking at nuclear policy in the overall energy system, and he promises a non-partisan examination of developments from the perspectives of both inside and outside Whitehall. What's interesting to me is how that talk might have changed since he wrote it in June. See you all next week, and thanks very much indeed.